But anxiety can also be that we're stuffing down other feelings that we have. And because we're not allowing ourselves to process feelings and feel the feelings and name the feelings and talk them out or discharge them, anxiety starts to say, hey, we're holding on to all of this emotion in our body, which this emotion in our body is this hormone flood, right? So it's really important that we understand what's happening in our brain and body when we're experiencing anxiety so we don't shame ourselves, so we can normalize. Your brain is doing something good for you. It's trying to protect you. It's sending this message to help you establish some sense of safety.
Hey, I'm Brooke Jean, therapist, recovering perfectionist, and struggling working mom on a mission to normalize normal. If you're an overwhelmed, high-achieving, and secretly anxious mama, struggling to balance it all and on the brink of burnout, you are in the right place. Here is where we talk about hard things like balancing work and family life, mental health, and how to navigate life-altering transitions. Nothing is too taboo here. In my conversations, I'll teach you how to let go of who you think you're supposed to be in order to create the life you've always wanted. Get ready to embrace your messy, shed the shoulds, and find freedom through a life unperfected. This is the Unperfected Pod.
Welcome back to the Unperfected Pod, where we normalize normal and find freedom through a life unperfected. Hello, 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 mama. Welcome back to the Unperfected Pod. I'm Brooke Jean, your host, and here is where we keep it really real, all things struggling working mom. And one of the things that I myself and so many of us high-performing, high-achieving working mamas experience is anxiety. And so today I'm going to be coming at anxiety from a little bit different of an angle to share with you the technique of befriending your anxiety and how that can help you manage it so it's not calling the shots of your life. And I have already talked a little bit about anxiety on episode 5 of the podcast, where I talk about the importance of regulating your nervous system, because anxiety is coming from that nervous system. And when we get anxious, one of the first things that happens is that rational thinking brain goes offline. So we can't mindset our way out of it. We have to regulate our nervous system first. That thinking brain comes back online, and then we can utilize the mindset work and some of the other tools that I'll be teaching you. So, brief overview of what the heck is anxiety anyway. So let me give you guys a little brain science of what the heck's happening. I guess it's brain and body science of what the heck is happening when you are experiencing anxiety. And I first want to say that it feels and shows up a little bit different for everybody. Different things cause anxiety for different people. So there is not one simple kind of explanation. But from my position, anxiety is basically just a hormonal surplus that is flooding your system, that is firing up your nervous system because your brain has determined there's some form of threat or danger. And so what happens is all the stimuli that we receive come through our receptors, and 90% of our receptors are in our eyes. So stimuli comes through our receptor in our eyes, which is the retina. That information travels through the optic nerve to the amygdala. And the amygdala is the alarm center of our brain. It's the mechanism that's going to determine if this information or this stimuli that's coming at you is threatening or non-threatening, and what level of threat is required or what level of response is required for this threat. And if the amygdala determines that this information coming in is threatening or dangerous, and when I say threatening or dangerous, I don't just mean like in the capital T trauma kind of way. I don't mean in only the loud and obvious dangers. I mean like your husband's tone could be off, or your boss's tone in the email can shake you, or you could pick up on someone's energy and it can shake you, or you can smell something and that same scent is is connected to a traumatic memory that's stuck in the brain, right? So a lot of times news is triggering, social media is triggering. So I'm talking about not just the obvious and conscious threats or dangerous things that we come across. I'm also talking about those more insidious, subconscious, mini threats, microaggressions that maybe you don't even know are hitting you every day. So this information is coming in. Our amygdala is determining it is indeed a threat. It's going to send this message that we need to fire up the nervous system through your vagus nerve and to the nervous system. And then it's going to fire up the sympathetic nervous system. And that sympathetic nervous system is going to flood your brain and body with cortisol and adrenaline. And I believe it's epinephrine. I'll have to double check on that. But you basically get a hormonal flood, which feels like that intense energy, right? And what happens is we get flooded, many of us, many times a day, and we don't actually discharge that hormonal surplus. It just stays and sticks around in our body. And that physical sensation is what we label anxiety, what we label stress, what we label worry, or whatever it is. But definitely anxiety is such a common one. But anxiety can also be that we're stuffing down other feelings that we have. And because we're not allowing ourselves to process feelings and feel the feelings and name the feelings and talk them out or discharge them, anxiety starts to say, hey, we're holding on to all of this emotion in our body, which this emotion in our body is this hormone flood, right? So it's really important that we understand what's happening in our brain and body when we're experiencing anxiety so we don't shame ourselves, so we can normalize. Your brain is doing something good for you. It's trying to protect you, right? It's sending this message to help you establish some sense of safety. So it's a good thing. But what happens is when we go through many traumas throughout our lives, whether they're mini traumas or massive traumas, and then you live through things like the pandemic and all of these other things that we've been through as a culture in the last several years, all of our amygdalas are hyperactive. Like they're fucking finding a problem everywhere they go, right? Like a lot of us are feeling more heightened in our anxiety, more easily triggered since the pandemic. And I want to normalize that. So we're all walking around as a population with overactive amygdalas that are just firing signals left and right that we need some version of a trauma response. And then that trauma response stuck in our nervous systems. We are the only animal, by the way, that doesn't discharge this energy, this emotion, this hormonal surplus right after experiencing the triggering event. Every other animal, if they make it to safety, will shake it out. They will look like they're having a seizure. But we as human beings have evolved where we just bury that stuff. And if you can imagine over time, we've buried all this emotion. We've buried all of these responses. How that starts to show up looks like things like autoimmune diseases. It looks like physical ailments. It looks like improper sleep. It looks like anxiety and depression. It looks like anger issues. It looks like addiction issues. These are just a few things that happen when we stuff our feelings down. And anxiety is usually an indicator that we've got something that we need to discharge. So going back to episode 5, my loves, we got to discharge the energy. We've got to regulate our nervous system first before we can roll into this step that I'm talking about today. So that's a little overview of what the heck is happening in your brain and body when you're feeling anxiety. And I want to share it with you to empower you to understand what's happening so you can also see your anxiety with some understanding, some compassion, some grace of you're not broken. You are not broken. There is nothing seriously wrong with you. Your body is just continuously determining there's some level of threat or unsafety, and it has been overworking to keep you safe. And what we need to do is reprogram these parts of us to understand that we are safe, and what is a real threat versus a perceived threat. All right, so in working with the anxiety, why would we be interested in this wild idea that I'm presenting today around befriending it? Who the heck wants to befriend their anxiety? Here is why. Because wrestling with it creates a energetic battle. Like, it takes energy to wrestle with the anxiety. It takes energy to host the anxiety in your brain and body. It also takes energy to wrestle with it, to be in resistance with it. Okay, in acceptance and commitment therapy ACT, we call that turning the struggle switch on. So you have the anxiety, then you have the anxiety about having the anxiety, or you have shame that you have anxiety, or you have embarrassment that you have anxiety, or you're angry that you still suffer with anxiety. So you already have the anxiety, and then you have your judgment about it. You're wrestling with it. Make it go away, make it go away. That gives it more power. That fuels the flames. Sometimes, you guys, you can kickstart a panic attack or an anxiety attack because you've worked yourself up anticipating one. Okay, so research is showing that there's anticipatory hormones. So when you are anticipating a stressful event, you will release the stressful hormones before you experience it. Similarly to reward hormones, you will release reward hormones just anticipating that ice cream or that next drink or whatever, hooking up with that guy. So we need to understand that if we are planning for something to make us anxious because we're resisting our anxiety, we're going to prematurely release those stressful hormones, which is going to perpetuate and even make that anxiety stronger and louder. So we don't want to be wrestling with it. We don't want to be anticipating it. When you start to feel anxious, how many of you, this is so normal, how many of you start to go, oh no, no, we cannot feel this way today. We are not getting anxious on the way to work. We are not starting to spiral in our thoughts. We are not feeling like we're going to throw up, right? No. And that resistance to it releases more of those hormones. And so it expands it. And so what I'm suggesting today is that instead of resisting it, instead of mustering up the energy to turn that struggle switch on and have some judgment about your anxiety, can we take a different approach and relate differently to the anxiety? You see, you have some anxiety. Anxiety is just a part of your experience. It doesn't define who you are. You are not an anxious person. So right now, I want to call you into your higher self. I want to call your higher self forward. Okay, your highest self is going to be your most adult, mature, lives in the present moment, believes in herself and her skills and abilities, has faith in herself and others, has a faith in something bigger than her that is holding her. And she makes decisions based on her intuition, based on her lived experiences, based on the here and the now. She does not make decisions based on fear, past programming and conditioning, or trauma, or trying to keep herself safe. And as human beings, we are complex organisms and we have many parts. So I'm tapping into your highest self. Some people call it the self with a capital S. That's from IFS therapy. Some people call it your higher self. I actually call it the CEO. Boss energy, baby. So here's what the image I want to give you. I call it the CEO table of life. You, queen, are sitting at the head of the table in the CEO spot. This is your highest self. And around your beautiful table of life, you have all your other parts. You have your inner child. You have your inner adolescent. You have your protective parts. So that's where the anxiety would be. So that anxiety is a protective part of you that is just trying to keep you safe. Like the different roles that you have. So like I have the mother part, I have the driven performer part. I want you to imagine, or if you have the gift of time, get out a piece of paper and a pen and actually draw out this table of life where you're at the head and everybody has a seat. And what happens is when we get triggered psychologically, when we go into a fight, flight, freeze, or shut down, that anxiety, that protective part kicks out our CEO and is now at the head seat of the table and is now determining how you are living your life. Now that anxiety is making the decisions. That anxiety is showing up in the fight with your partner. That anxiety is sending that email that wasn't very mindful or skillful. And this is where so many of us are living, and not just living, but working. Professionals are working from their friggin' inner adolescent, anxious, protective part. And that's why you see some of the behaviors that you see online, in meetings, and in and amongst teams. Because if people haven't done their work and they don't have the awareness that they're triggered or they're in a protective part, they don't realize that they're leading from that place. And they don't realize how much better it will be if they work through this and lead from their highest self. You're going to become more magnetic. You're going to become more empathetic. You're going to become an incredible leader. People are going to want to work with you and be around you because you're kind and considerate, but driven and focused, and you're authentic. But not everyone is doing this work, but I know you are because you're just listening to this podcast. So, hey, yo, high five to you, my love. So anyways, I want you to call upon your CEO, boss energy, highest self right now. She does not let anxiety decide. However, she appreciates that anxious part. She can understand and have some compassion for why that part shows up. So let me tell you this, as mothers, we become more anxious once we have our babies. Why? Because now we have a responsibility to protect these precious beings. What a beautiful thing that we automatically go into this mode of mama bear protection, where half of our brain is under construction so we can hear our baby cry 2 miles away, where we can sense how our baby is feeling, where we can sense if someone's weird at the park and to go grab our kid or they're going to fall down to go scoop them up. Why are we so amazing that we have this just like, it's this beautiful, I don't even know how to describe it because it almost feels like spiritual to me, this mama intuition, these mama superpowers that we have. But they also come with a little bit of anxiety, don't they? But how beautiful. Can we at least acknowledge that our anxiety has served a purpose? It has kept us safe our whole lives. It has kept us looking around and making sure everything's okay. It has kept us in fear of rejection so we don't get kicked out. It has kept us thinking ahead and planning, but we have overworked this part. This part needs a break. And so to walk this part to its seat at your table of life that is away from you, I would even put her down a little bit, right? I would keep my inner children close to me, and I would keep that anxiety just a little bit further away so she has more steps to run to take over my seat as the CEO. I walk her to her seat and I hug her and I say, thank you. Thank you for working so hard to keep me safe and for being so diligent and so attuned and so strong and so brave. Because you see, when I've had to really defend myself, I need her. I need her. She's feisty, but I need her. And when we befriend our anxiety, or when we at least acknowledge that it serves a purpose, or when we can have a little bit of compassion, we can relate to it from this more loving, nurturing energy versus being in the chaotic energy of resistance. And when you can have this self-compassion for yourself, or this self-understanding or self-awareness, that is growth. That is beautiful. That is therapeutic. That is healing. And that is also electric, meaning it's going to raise your frequency. So we don't need to be at war with ourselves any more than we've already been at war with ourselves, whether it's our anxiety, our minds, our bodies, our habits, our patterns, our nose, our whatever, our voice, all the things that we've been so hard on ourselves. Can we just not when it comes to anxiety? You don't wake up and go, oh, I can't wait to worry about everything. I can't wait to have this anxious energy at work. I can't wait to have a cortisol spike first thing in the morning. I know you're not choosing it, but there are things we can do. But we also do need some of it, right? If we didn't have some of that, we would just be walking out in the middle of the street and getting hit by a car. We would just be hooking up with idiots left and right. We would just be making decisions that were not mindful and safe, right? So we need it. It serves a purpose. It deserves a seat at your table. And when you take this approach, it starts to dim its intensity. So if you ignore this part, she's going to get louder and louder and louder until you have a migraine for 5 days or shingles, for Pete's sakes. Okay? But when you acknowledge your anxiety, I see you, girl. I'm going to always check in with you to see what you have to say before I make a decision. But you also are not making the decisions. CEO is going to take everybody's thoughts into consideration. And then she's going to really look at what's actually happening in the present moment and what's actually in alignment with the highest good for me and all. That's where I'm sitting and making decisions from. But I will always check in with you, anxiety. And when she knows you're going to check in with her, she relaxes. She settles into her seat and goes, okay, I don't have to show up and be vicious here because Brooke's got it under control. So I want you to tap into that CEO energy. And I want you to start to take steps toward that anxiety. Maybe you're not ready to befriend it. That just feels way too long of a stretch. That's okay. Can you at least stop wrestling with it? Can you at least refrain from the resistance? Can you at least see how it served a purpose? Can you acknowledge that it keeps you safe? Can you have compassion for why it's there in the first place? We've all survived a pandemic and we're living this messy life of raising humans and we have no idea what we're doing and we're all trying to change intergenerational traumas and curses and doing our own work and realizing that we have trauma. We're doing the best we flipping can, and we have this anxiety because of all the shit we've been through. Can we have a little compassion for that, please? And then from there, can we start to give her a proper voice and seat at the table? Can we start to check in with her? Can we start to see her? And then from there, can we start to befriend her? From there, can we start to love her, take care of her? All of this is going to help you melt that anxiety. So here's what I want you to do. The next time your anxiety is presenting, right? Whether you experience it as thoughts or body sensations or patterns of behavior, whatever it is, I want you to first notice it and name it. You can even name your anxiety. You want to call her bad bitch, call her bad bitch. You want to call her Felicia, call her Felicia. You want to call her anxious Annie, whatever you want. You can give it a name because it isn't you, it's a part. And giving it a name puts distance between it and your reality and your response. Okay, this distance is really important because this distance creates the space at which you use one of your coping mechanisms, where we dismantle the pattern that we normally fall in with our anxiety. Okay, and so you notice it. Oh, there's anxious Annie. Yeah, I like to get playful with it. I like to get playful and talk a little, you know what. There's anxious Annie. Hey, girl, knew you'd be on the scene today. Knew you'd have something to say or 47 million things to say about this, right? Be playful. There's always room for playfulness in our lives. Yes, healing is serious, but we don't need to take it so seriously along the way. This is a journey, Queen. We're going to be doing work on ourselves for a while. Have some fun with it. Be playful. You deserve that. Okay, so anxious Annie's on the scene again. We're befriending her. We're giving her a hard time. Take a breath. Then you're going to ask, what does anxious Annie want me to know here? So here is where you're calling on her, and she's seated at the table. You're at the head. Your CEO is calling on her. Anxious Annie, my love, I can see you're worked up. I can see, what do you have to say about this? And anxious Annie has to say, no, we can't do that because everyone's going to think it's terrible and I'm going to lose my job. And if I lose my job, we won't have enough money. And if we don't have enough money, me and my partner are going to break. And okay, so it's like Anxious Annie loves to tell us not only what could go wrong here, but the implication 20 steps ahead. She really likes to future trip, doesn't she? But no shame. We understand why Anxious Annie needs to future trip. It's just we're not living from that space in the CEO seat. Anxious Annie, what do you have to say? She tells you, then you ask yourself, your highest self, your CEO self, is it true? Is it helpful? How do I know it to be true? And then you take another deep breath because we're continuously regulating when we do that. Then here's the magic question that invites psychological flexibility or new neural connections to form in your brain, therefore new thought patterns, therefore new beliefs, right? Is what else might be possible here? So Anxious Annie thinks that I'm going to show up and I'm going to bomb this and I'm going to lose my job and we're going to go broke and me and my husband are going to break. What evidence do I have in this very moment that's true? And also what might be possible? I could show up and actually do a decent job, or hell, maybe even a good job, maybe even a great job, because I do prepare. I do show up prepared. I do have good intention. I want to do well. I know my stuff. What if I just go and be myself and it works out okay? And then what if somebody there wants to chat more with me about it and I make a good connection or another opportunity presents itself? And what if that opportunity opens up a new door for me? So do you see how our anxiety wants us to go to that worst case scenario, but we have to hear it out first before we can then go to a different possible scenario. But what we usually do is just try to ignore Anxious Annie, stuff her down, repress it, wrestle with it. And guess what? Anxious Annie is only going to get louder and scream danger and danger until you have hives, okay? So this is why we want to befriend her. We want to give her a voice so she can then relax. Then we want to practice running it through the filter of, is it true? Is it helpful? And what else might be possible? And then your highest self, your CEO self, determines the next step of action based on this process. But you can see that when we get anxious, we normally automatically go into the anxiety response, which is to over prepare and overprotect and worry about it and lose sleep over it, or numb out completely and procrastinate till the very last minute and sabotage it, or freak out and not feel good and stuff our feelings with food or whatever we stuff our feelings with. And then it creates additional problems. But instead, I'm asking you to put some awareness between the stimuli and your anxiety response. And so you can choose a new response. And so anytime you just pause and notice that Anxious Annie has shown up, you're creating that space. Every time you breathe, even more space. Then you ask, is it true? More space. Is it helpful? More space. And so even if you start with just the step of acknowledging that Anxious Annie is on the scene, you're creating that space and you can build that over time to where you start to notice the anxiety is coming through and you start to immediately go into, okay, Anxious Annie, what do you have to say? Is it true? Is it helpful? Take a breath. And this is where we start to live more consciously. And this is how we start to take better care of ourselves. This is self-care. And I hope you guys are with me on this. I hope that you guys are following. When we start to take action from that CEO self, we start to build self-respect. We start to trust ourselves. Then all of our parts rebuild trust with us. They're like, she's got it together. She's not going to put us in a terrible situation. She's going to make sure that we show up and we live our life and that we're okay. She's got this. So they all start to settle. So let me recap for you. Anxiety is just your brain and body's way of keeping you safe. We've become more and more anxious over time as a species, and we don't discharge the hormonal surplus in our body and our nervous systems that is the anxiety. So we want to complete our stress cycle every day. I'll do a separate podcast just on that. 20 minutes of movement is the most efficient method for that. We are more anxious than we've ever been, and yet we're just stuffing it down and it's creating different issues with us. We're turning on the struggle switch and we're wrestling with and resisting our anxiety, which means the anxiety is going to get bigger and louder. And if we continue to ignore it, it's going to show up as other problems. Okay. So instead of resisting it or stuffing it or ignoring it or letting it completely take over the CEO spot at your table of life, we are going to, take our seat as the CEO. We are going to walk anxious Annie to her seat at the table. We are going to acknowledge her. We are going to understand that she has served a purpose. We are going to see what she has to say about things and check in on her. But we're also going to stand really strong and grounded in our presence. That's just one way to look at things. We live from present moment. We don't live from past. We don't live from future tripping. We trust ourselves to make these decisions right here, right now. And when you get kicked out of your CEO seat, you recognize when it's happening, you take a breath, you show yourself some grace and space, because that happens a lot every time we get triggered, basically, and you walk your happy fanny back in and you go, that happens. Have you ever felt like you've lost control of your family? Every night between 4 and 6, like the wheels are falling off the bus. No one's listening. No one's doing what they're supposed to be doing. At this point, your husband's not even supporting. We've lost all control. And we're just like, some of us just throw in the towel and let the chaos unfold. Or you try to regain the control. But I'm saying, like, it happens. It doesn't mean you're a bad person or a weak person or a bad mother. We lose control of our families all the time. So why wouldn't we also lose control of our internal family system? And so it happens, right? Anxiety kicks us out of our seat and says, I got to take over here. Or fear does, or anger does, or the angry inner adolescent. She steps in to protect you. There's no shame in that game, guys. It happens. But we just need to have the awareness that it's happening, show ourselves the grace and space, and then take our damn seat back and get some order here and do it from a loving and playful place. All right? Do it from a loving and playful place. I would love to hear from you if you are resonating with this and you are going to start trying to befriend your anxiety. If you haven't already, join me in my private Facebook group, Mommy's Mental Health Matters, where we keep the conversation going. I invite every guest that I have on the show to be part of that group so they can answer questions you have. I ask that group what they want to see on the podcast. I also show up live on Wednesdays at 2:00 for free and do live coaching in that group. So please join us over there and let us know what's been going on with your anxiety. But let's freaking normalize normal. We are all walking around just a little more anxious than we were before. And it doesn't mean we're broken or bad. It just means we have really overactive amygdalas and nervous systems, and we can manage them so they're not managing me. That is it for today, my loves. I hope you found a nugget helpful that you can put in your back pocket and weave into your world. If you are loving the podcast, I would so appreciate if you shared it with a mama. Another mama who could use some mental health tips or to feel less alone or even some laughter. Will you please share my podcast with one mama this week? That would mean the absolute world to me, because I am on a mission to help mommy with her mental health, and it's a free resource, right? I want these free resources in the heads and hearts of as many mamas as possible, because when we collectively exhale, when we collectively heal, when we collectively shed shoulds, when we collectively lower the bar and normalize normal, the power of that is going to be felt worldwide. And we can then use our precious jewels, time, energy, and sanity on things that really bring us to life, things that matter most to us. And that is my hope for you. So share it with a mama, and I love you all so much. I will see you same time, same place next week. Bye for now. Thank you so much for listening to the Unperfected Pod. I hope this episode helped you feel a little less alone and a little more inspired to be you. If you like what we're doing here, I would so appreciate that you subscribe, rate, and review this podcast.
If you do, share the episode on Instagram and tag me at BrookeJeanUnperfected to enter to win a one-to-one laser coaching session. Also, feel free to join me in my private Facebook community, Mommy's Mental Health Matters, where we continue the conversation. Thanks again for being here, and see you in next week's episode.